Over on my Discord, the question was asked, what would it take to punch a hole in the bottom of this airplane model suitable for mounting on this stand? So let's talk about that. Now, you might notice that I'm not using the same airplane model that they're using because they paid for theirs and I didn't want to pay for it for this example, but I am using the same stand model. And let's take a look at this stand model for just 1 second. The top of it has this little recess with this very thin line around the outside that honestly I'm a little bit concerned is maybe too thin. I might design this a little bit beefier. But regardless of that, the point of this hole here is to take a magnet that is, let's just pull up our cylinder, 2.5 in radius and 1 in depth, so basically 5 millimeters across and 1 millimeter high. And then if we put it in here, we'll see that, yeah, it just about fits perfectly in this little hole here. So that's the reason for it. However, that means that we can't just take this stand, let me get that out of the way there, and Boolean a hole out of the airplane model because it'll have this little, negative recess in it. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make our own hole and pull it out of there. But before we do that, you might notice that the airplane model is not centered to our view. And here's the thing about it. Even if we move it to the center of the view, do you see this little dot here? This little dot defines the quote-unquote center point, or the actual word is origin, of the airplane. So if I were to rotate it, notice that it doesn't rotate around the airplane, but it rotates around this origin point. Now, if you add an object, let's just add a quick cube here. You'll notice that if I rotate it, it rotates around the center because added objects have their origin point at their center. But if I go into edit mode, I could move all the points off to the side and then go back in object mode, and now it's rotating around an odd center. So the origin point doesn't necessarily need to be in the center of the object, and indeed that's what we have with this model. When they exported it, it was off to the side of the space, and so they set their origin point off to the side. Well, to begin with, in order to align these models, we're really going to want to put that center point in a place that's a little bit more towards the center of the object. Unfortunately, that's super easy to do. Here's how we do this. In the object menu at the top of the 3D view, set origin, and then origin to geometry. It tries to move the center point to match where the geometry is. So now notice that center point is in a position that I would say is pretty much centered left to right, at least for the airplane. And if you look at it, it looks like it's generally centered front to back, and it looks like it's centered top to bottom, but it generated this center point based on the geometry of the model. So if we change our display mode for this object in the object data over here to bounds, where it basically just draws a box around the highest and lowest and midpoints, notice that the center point is actually kind of a little too far back and a little too far low. Well, if we go back to textured mode, that's because there isn't so much on the high end. It's kind of interesting the way that it calculates the center point. But I think for our purposes, this is going to work fine. And if I hit Alt-G to undo the transform movement, in other words, put it back in the center point, sure enough, it's at pretty much the center point here. I might have to move it up just a little bit, just so that we have the center point at the bottom of it. But otherwise, I think that's pretty much exactly what we want. Now, we don't necessarily have to move the stand, but I want to do it in this video for an example of another way to move the origin. So, what if we wanted the origin instead of being, for instance, this object, again, its center point is over here, okay? It's not where we want it. And if we go object set origin to geometry, well, it's not exactly centered exactly where we want it. In fact, really, for this particular object, I would actually want its origin point to be way up here. It would make more sense for this project anyways, if we could put it up here so that we can use that to align it to the other object. Well, we can actually do that. Go into edit mode, and in wireframe mode, so you're selecting everything, deselect everything, select all the vertices on the top, and then hit Shift S to snap. And then there's all sorts of snap options here. They're all super useful, but I want to snap the 3D cursor to the middle of the selected object. So cursor to selected. Now it puts the 3D cursor up here, and the 3D cursor is where new objects will be generated, but it's also kind of just a placeholder. And so if I go object, set origin to the 3D cursor, now the object's origin, let's go back to solid mode, is right up here. So if we rotate it, it rotates here, but it also means that if we hit Alt G, it puts it, well, pretty much where we want it in relation to the airplane. I'm going to rotate it around the Z90, negative 90, I guess, so that it's lined up properly. But that'll put this in a place that we can actually have something useful of it. Now, you'll notice that the cursor is way out to the side, and if we want to put the cursor back, well, there's a couple of ways to do it. If you open up the side panel with N, under View, I think we have the 3D cursor's locations here, X, Y, and Z, and we can just type those in and say 0, or we can hit Shift-C to recenter our view in the middle, and it puts the 3D cursor back where it is. So either one of those will work. But now that we've got our plane in place and we've got our stand in place, we want to, well, you know, I've got my little magnet cylinder here. I'm going to delete that real fast. We want to make a hole in our airplane. We actually don't even need the stand for this. We want a hole in our airplane, and we're going to have to make it. So, well, let's do that. I'm going to select the stand, and I'm just going to hide it for now. And then at the 3D cursor, we're looking at it from below so we can see it. Let's Shift A, add a cylinder. Now I want this cylinder. Okay, this is the magnet. It remembers the dimensions. So 5 millimeters across, or 0.25 radius, and 1 millimeter deep. But that's not actually the size that we want, because we're going to need a little bit of tolerance on the side. So we want this to be a little bit bigger. 2.6, yeah, that would work okay. If we did 3, that would make it a whole millimeter difference, which would put a 0.5 millimeter gap all the way around it. And that doesn't seem like much, and it's not, but a 6 millimeter hole would definitely give us room, even if the 3D printer is inaccurate, to putting a 5 millimeter magnet in there. I might go and say 2.75 so that it actually comes out to be, let's go to item here, 5.5. That means we've got 0.25 millimeters all the way around the edge. I think that's fine. But what I'm going to do now, this is going to be our hole, our stand hole, and I'm going to create a shape. I'm going to bring this into local view. I'm going to create a shape that is basically used in other connectors like this. So we go into edit mode, go into wireframe mode, and box select all the objects, all the vertices on the top. So if you're not in vertices select mode, hit 1, B to box select everything on the top there, okay? And I'm going to GZ.5. That ensures that we have 1 millimeter below the gap, so that our 1 millimeter magnet will fit in there. But then it extends below just a little bit, so that our Boolean modifier is happy. It doesn't necessarily like it when things are lined up perfectly. If you can extend beyond it a little bit better. But I also want to change this here. So I'm going to hit E to extrude, S to scale, and then type 0.5 to scale it 0.5. So we now have a circle that's half the diameter of this. And then I'm going to extrude it up 6. So I just type 6. This creates a little T-peg, which is very similar to a very common type of peg. Now, I will, say this disclaimer. I'm not 100% sure that this is the right dimensions for that peg. So I would not be surprised at all if it didn't fit perfectly. But if you were to use these pegs instead of the magnets, I think that this would work sufficiently. Okay, we're going to hit tab to exit out of edit mode and hit slash to go back into regular view. And while we're in wireframe mode, I'm going to, from the side view here, try to move the airplane down as far as we need to. Maybe I'll go to solid mode to see where that is. Because see, this airplane, it slants down, and so it's difficult to tell, especially in wireframe mode, where the bottom of the airplane is in this mess of wireframes. So I'm just going to have to eyeball it. And I think that that's probably deep enough. Chances are the magnet is going to be sticking out of the bottom of here just a little bit, but I think that's about where we want it. Okay, now it's time to cut this circular hole out of the airplane. And, oh, no, you know what? My pegs went up too high. So I'm going to go back into edit mode. And I'm just going to, with all that face selected on the top, or you can hit 3 in face select mode, I'm going to go GZ -4. Sticking that up 6 millimeters was a mistake. Yeah, that should be fine. In fact, you know, you might not even want that additional little peg. I was being silly with it. We could decide to just get rid of that entirely. Don't delete it. Actually, I can show you how to get rid of that. Sometimes we think differently. So with this face selected, hit Control plus to select all the edges around it, and then hit Control plus to select all of those edges. But stop at this edge here, and then hit X to delete, but choose Dissolve Faces. Dissolve Faces doesn't actually delete anything, but it takes all of those faces and turns them into one face, which does destroy the internal geometry. So we're back to it just being a little peg. And you know what? I'm going to go with that for now. Sometimes we think different while we're working, and that's fine. Okay, now let's get this hole out of here. So with the hole selected, you hit Shift and select the airplane second. So first select the peg, and then Shift select the airplane. Then, if you have installed the BoolTool add-on, you go to the Edit menu into Sidebar, open up BoolTool, and Brush Boolean Difference. Click that, and we got the peg in it. Now, if you have not installed the BoolTool, well, you should absolutely watch my video where I recommend the plugins that you should install, and then install it, because it's a great tool. But if you don't have that, I'll undo that real fast, and I'll show you how we do it instead. Instead of clicking and shift clicking, just click the airplane, add a modifier to it, Boolean modifier. We're already in difference mode. Select the object, and with the eyedropper we can select the stand hole, or we can just click the drop down and choose stand hole. And now we're subtracting a hole out of it, but you can't see it unless we take the airplane into local mode. Haha, in local mode we can see it. Why can't we see it? Well, because the hole that we're cutting out is covering up the hole that we're cutting out. Now we can take this hole and we can hit H to hide it, but you know, I kind of prefer, instead of hiding it, I'll hit Alt H to unhide everything. Actually, let's hide the stand again. To leave it here but have it be transparent. And the way that we do that is under Object Properties, we go Display as Bounds, and we've basically just done everything that the BoolTool does in one click, but we've got it in there. Now, the reason why I'm suggesting doing it like this, though, with a brush with the Boolean modifier, is that we can move this along the X and the hole will move with us. So if we do this and we go, you know what, this is making it a little bit too front heavy and we want to try it again, we can, you know, move it back here just a little bit. Now, I am going to say that the center around geometry probably put this in more or less the right place, but I don't know for sure. But if we come out of local view, actually, sorry, if we unhide the stand, this will give us a pretty good idea of how that stand's going to do. Again, there will be a magnet in the stand, and then there will be a magnet in the airplane, and they'll just snap together like that. Now, last thing you got to do is select just the airplane. So just select the airplane. File, Export, not import, Export STL. And make sure that you have selection only selected when you do that. Give it a name, put it wherever you want, and export the STL. And then you've got an STL with the little magnet hole in it, and you can print it and drop in your 5mm magnet, and you're good to go. Well, I hope that has helped. I hope that you've learned a little something about Blender. And, if you think that this is a pretty neat tool, I've got a whole tutorial series where I go over some of these things. So I hope that you'll check it out. And besides that, I want to thank you very much for watching. And I want to remind you that you are a child of God and you're special to me. So take care of yourself. And if you can, well, take care of somebody else too, because I'm sure we can all need it. We can all need it? I'm sure we all need it. I hope you all have a good night, and thanks for watching.